This episode is brought to you by Communications Training for Coffee Teams, a new Map It Forward workshop tailored to get your team communicating more confidently to improve general mental health as well as business profitability. Click the link in the show notes for further details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, it is our first in a 5-part series that I'm titling Preparing for Change. This is the first solo series for 2023. I don't expect that I'll be doing a lot of solo series this year because we have a lot of fabulous guests coming up. But right now is an important time for me to do a solo series because I want to talk directly to you about some things that are happening in the global economy as well as in the supply chain over the space of the next 5 episodes that I think are important for you to start thinking about as a matter of, I wouldn't say urgency, but as preparedness. And so we're titling the theme of this series, Preparing for Change. And in this episode of the 5-part series, we're going to be talking about, are you prepared for change? Now, what specifically am I talking about when I'm talking about being prepared for the change that's coming? Well, since between March and May of 2021, we had really started to focus quite heavily on the idea of economics on this podcast, and particularly economics with regards to the supply chain, the coffee supply chain, and with regards to the way the coffee is traded. We were focusing heavily on finance in business, and we're trying to get you really focused on making sure that you are across a lot of the numbers and economic language that's related to the coffee supply chain. And because we've been talking about it so much since 2021, and we have been warning about an economic tsunami, I constantly was contacted by people saying, Lee, is this thing the marker for the economic tsunami? And who can know such things? But what I can tell you is that I think that with what happened with SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, just recently, and with what's going on with, we're up to, I think, 4 or 5 banks that have gone out of business. I don't know if this is the beginning of the economic tsunami, but what I can tell you is that there have been a number of markers that have happened recently that give me reason for pause and have given me enough reason for pause that I want to do this series. We do have Carly Garner, who is my favorite commodity broker, to come and talk about all things economics and coffee trading and coffee pricing. She will be coming on the podcast this coming week, and we will be breaking down what is going on in the economy globally and how worried we should be. So we do have an expert coming on to talk about that and help us break it down. But what is going to be important is for you to assess how prepared you are if there is significant economic shift globally. And that is important whether you are a business owner or whether you are a professional in the coffee industry. So the audience for this podcast is really vast. We have people who are CEOs of big companies, as well as people who are starting out as baristas, as well as people who are not in the coffee industry at all. What I want to say to everybody is, it is your responsibility to make sure that you are ready for whatever it is that comes. The last financial crash that happened in 2009, I understood nothing about economics. And I look back at that now and I look at why it took me so long to recover financially from that. It was because I was completely illiterate when it comes to economics and when it comes to finance. I also had handed over responsibility of a lot of my financial dealings to my accountant. And my accountant is fantastic. But when it came to literacy and understanding my financial health, that wasn't reasonable of me to transfer ownership and agency of that over to him. And so one way that it is really, really important for you to be prepared is to make sure that you have enough financial literacy to understand where you're at. And what I would do if I were you and you haven't started that journey yet is I would start looking at listening to a number of daily podcasts that have financial information that are geared to the everyday person. There are a lot of podcasts that are put out by Planet Money, by NPR, that are really great at breaking a lot of this down. So I would encourage you to start getting financially literate. I would encourage you to start asking questions of people who seem a little bit more financially literate than you. You don't have to hound them and hassle them. But what I would recommend is that if you hear a word that you don't understand, ask them to explain it. I'm someone who has to work very hard to learn things. And so this is my next tip for you, is learn how you learn. So I'm not somebody who can read something once or hear something once or watch something once and I absorb it. I have to have repeated exposure to things, and I have to work very hard to learn the things that I learn. So that means that if I do want to get literate on a subject, I already know that because that's the way that I learn, I have to immerse myself in it. So what I would recommend is that you figure out how you learn and then go about learning it. Now, if you are already financially literate, what I would invite you to do is make sure that you are across this whole series that we're going to be putting out, so that you are attuned to making sure that you have your runway ready, you have your revenue streams ready. Make sure that you are aware of where this is an important one. Understand where your staff are at. Understand where the labor force is at, because far too many times we see people who are financially literate and are very good, very, very good at getting literate about all the important number stuff, but they're a little lax on the empathy side of things and understanding where their staff are meeting them. So please, in getting prepared for the change that's coming, that I believe is coming, and there's some good information out there to suggest that that's correct. In getting prepared for that change, understand where your exposures are with regards to your staff, and with regards, if you're an employee, know your employer's position when it comes to all of this. It's going to be important for you to know how and why the change is going to happen and how you'll adapt to it. So being prepared, an important part of being prepared is understanding what the different scenarios are and what your potential solutions are to the shift in those things. So for example, if there is a global financial collapse, or a banking crisis, or a currency crisis, or fiat currency becomes so what we think is money. Something fiat is a money source that's not anchored to like a gold standard. So let's say the money system that we have collapses. Have you thought about what you'll do in that scenario? Have you thought about what happens if there is a run on the bank that you bank with? How will the business that you work for operate? How will the business you own operate? Knowing what your exposures are and thinking about how you'll deal with those exposures is going to be a very important part of your adaptability and the way that you experience any change that's coming. And so let's take a really general example. If you are a coffee roaster and you buy green coffee and you have to make payment for some green coffee and that green coffee arrives, how are you going to make payment on that coffee if, let's say, something happens with the bank that you bank with? Now, you might be thinking, that's just absurd. But I want to put it to you this way, very generally explaining what happened with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank's main customers were not people like you and I. Their customers were big tech companies who stored their money in SVB so that they could make payroll. They were paying all of their general bills out of the accounts that were held by SVP. And we're talking about huge companies like Uber and Lyft and a lot of big tech companies. So if you think that something like this couldn't happen to you, I'm sure Uber didn't think that this would be something that could happen to them. Now, the FDIC, the insurance agency that took care of making sure that bank accounts depositors were covered, they did make all of those accounts whole. But it's important to understand that that is not a bottomless pit of money. And so we don't know if this is going to become what's called a contagion at this point. What we do know is that we're in some hot times where some financial stuff could go wrong. And a part of preparing for change is understanding how that change is going to impact you. So we've got 4 more episodes in this series where in the next episode, we're going to talk about understanding your financial position. And we're going to look at that from the perspective of income, debt, assets, and pricing. Then we're going to talk about securing your coffee revenue streams. Then we're going to talk about reassessing your plan, your business plan. And then we're going to talk about whether you need a consultant to get involved to help you get prepared for all of this. So stick with me. Join me for the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.